dad wasn't too enthused about me going on the road because I was going to high school then. And he wanted me to go to school, you see. He didn't want me to be on the road. So a friend of mine, Charlie Blair, told me, he says, you know, there's short of men down there. Why don't you go on down there and get on the road? So I was kind of scared at first, but my dad was out of town. So anyhow, I went down there. Next couple of days, it says, you're going out of town. So anyhow, I told my mother, I says, they want me to go out of town. I said, what should I tell your father? I said, well, you tell him I'm out of town. I'm on the railroad. The only problem I had was when I got home. So my dad says, I hear you on the road. He says, yeah. So he said, well, how you like it? Well, I said, not too bad the first job. He said, well, I'm going to give you 3 months, and I know you ain't going to like the job. He said 3 months. I stayed there for 41 years and 1 month.
As long as my father was living, he didn't want me to be a railroad porter because he said railroad porters always dress up, have a tie on. He thought they were mostly sporting class people. That's what my father thought. But as my dad had come out of Abilene, Kansas, it was nothing but a grown-up country boy. All he knew was farming. He didn't know nothing about working on the railroad. And he didn't want none of us boys to be on the railroad.
Well, my father used to work on the trains in the 20s until he come up with an accident when I was going to school there, and things were kind of tight in the family, and my brothers were overseas in the Army, so I said I better go to work. So I ended up working on the trains.
Balance a rail, step a track. When will my father be coming back?
Trains to me always suggest the blues because they're so mournful sounding, you know. With the train, I really just tried to get a very low-down bluesy feeling. It starts off with a bass line which goes.
Joe Seeley, a jazz musician, has composed the opus Africville Suite. In it, he pays tribute to his late father, Joseph Maurice Seeley, who was a sleeping car porter.
Well, he would tell me what his job was all about, but it wasn't until I was about, I'm trying to remember how old I was. I would say approximately 8 or 9 or 10 maybe. I went on a run with him. At that time, he was running to Fort William, Port Arthur. And I actually got to stay on the train overnight, and he made up my bunk for me, and he told me that I should put my shoes out, and then in the morning they would be polished and everything. And I watched him work, and he brought me food and refreshments and things like that, and I really got to see what he did, because basically he gave me the full treatment.
The tradition of the black Pullman porter was established by the Pullman Palace Car Company in the United States in 1867. Later, when the Pullman service expanded into Canada, the tradition of blacks working exclusively as porters was adopted by Canada's major railway companies. They were the caretakers of cultural nuances, philosophers and diplomats, who knew the land and the geography of the human spirit. Some earned degrees in science, languages, and religion. They traveled with and were traveling books. These men created and established the aesthetic for the job. Maximum efficiency and minimum fuss were their standards.
If you want to make any money, there's two things you got to do. First thing is, you got to have a smile on your face. Another thing is, you say to them, "Sir, was the service good?" This way here, that's where you're going to make your money. Now, if you don't give that man good service, or a smile, or hello, or good night, or how are you this morning, sir, you ain't going to make no money.
The best things in life is free. The sun that shines is free, the air you breathe, and it's so easy to say, "How are you today?" That don't cost you nothing.
They don't want to hear no complaints. They want you to go out there and give service. This way here, by you give them service, it's a good, how would you say it? Well, people say, "Gee, yeah, I went on to CNI, I went to Vancouver, I had Porter so-and-so, and the crew treated me royal." That's what they want to hear.
The Porters' backgrounds were greatly varied. They came not only from America, Canada, and Great Britain, but also from Africa and the Caribbean. They took much pride in every city in which they resided. In order to be considered citizens, they felt they should be seen as contributors to society.
Well, in Memphis, I finished high school in '43, and after I finished high school, I wanted a job. It was advertised in the paper. It says, "Canada needs porters." The racial situation up there was better than it was in Memphis at the time, so I said, well, I'll sign up, and was sent up here to Canada.
After I came to Canada, it was a matter of strict economics. I didn't have the luxury of sitting back and waiting till, to look around to see what jobs to select, et cetera, et cetera. So I worked for about 5 months in the garment industry, and after that, I worked for the railway. Because of the fact that, everyone told me, well, the jobs are there, the pay was fairly decent, and basically that was it.
It was summer, and we were looking for work. Like in Halifax, Nova Scotia, there was very little work for students, and they were hiring porters to go west. So I went down and took a chance to get on, and fortunately I did get on. And they told me 3 months, and I would come back home. When I recall leaving Halifax, next time it was 7 years later. So I stayed here all that time and worked.
But don't try to take your feelings on the job. I found that out, one of the big things. If you got some problems at home,
Leave me alone.
leave them at home.
Some porters lived in 3 homes: the home he left his family in, his home on the train, and the home at the end of the run. With few exceptions, that home was a refuge, the same single dwelling, the church. In Winnipeg, it was Pilgrim Baptist Church.
Hey, I can't keep that.
I arrived here in May '51. We arrived here by train, so the gentleman came down to meet us, bring us into Winnipeg. There was 19 of us, to be exact. He sort of mentioned, "You young fellas, we want you to behave yourself and be away from home and don't go crazy." And the first thing he said, "You go to Pilgrim Baptist Church." So It was an opportunity. That first night I arrived in Winnipeg, there was about 3 or 4 of us that went to church. And that was my first introduction to Pilgrim Baptist Church and its people. And over the years, my children all grew up in that church, and I'm still there now.
New community members changed the landscape everywhere. They had being human in common. Being black added to the local color variety. Sleeping car porters departed their homes fueled with dreams. Upon returning, filled their children's imagination with stories to dazzle. The porters were on call 21 of the 24 hours. The sights you could see and learn about. They saw everything in silence. But oh my, in snow. I lost my way west and was lost if I turned back.
My first trip going through the mountains, it was very exciting. Never seen the mountains, just hearing about them. And I remember staying up all night just to watch or look out the window where I should have been resting. I'm on the job. I should have been getting some rest. But just to look out the windows at night. Surprisingly, in the mountains, the skies are still quite blue at night, and you can see the mountains very well. Coming through the canyon, Fraser Canyon, just an amazing sight. First time was electrifying. Awesome sight.
Well, I guess my best experiences when I was working with some of the movie stars. Ronald Reagan, Alan Ladd, Veronica Lake.
One person that I met that I enjoyed meeting was Louis Armstrong.
We had the road making a picture up at Jasper.
River of No Return, wasn't it?
It's something like that, yeah. And Pearl Bailey, she was up that way.
I've met lots of millionaires, but I have never met one any better than me. I'm no better than he is now, but he's no better than I am.
Now, Diefenbaker, he was the prime minister one time, and he lived up in northern Saskatchewan. And I ran out of Saskatchewan there for a while with John and Moose Jaw. But I never got a chance to meet him. And he ran on the train back and forth. Frankly, I never got a chance to meet nobody of any, let me see, no movie stars. No, I met no famous people. But I think I had one on the back of my train one time. You know how cold it is in Canada. I had to make that adjustment overnight. When I left Memphis, I was walking around in sleeves almost. But when I came to Winnipeg, I think it was 25 or 30 below. And brother, I put on 2 pair of pants, 2 pairs of underwear. And I had on so much clothes. By the first winter, I could barely move.
Long layovers, stops in the tundra or at the tree line. We entertained ourselves day to day in minutes.
It was pretty tough, man, especially the winters. Yeah, but mainly we just played pool. Later on, we started playing golf. A few baseball games and things like that. Because none of us could ice skate, so we roller skated. Well, all the chaps from Nova Scotia, well, they could skate, because they played hockey like we played baseball.
I guess the main thing though, her, you're in condition.
Yeah,
It's not so much your age.
yeah, being
If you're in condition,
makes a difference.
sure makes a big difference.
We band together all the young Nova Scotians because coming from Nova Scotia, we played hockey. I played hockey in high school. We would scrimmage when we were in town. We'd get together. And maybe the coldest day of the winter, we would go skating just about every day we were in town. We'd go out there and play hockey. What are you going to do at 40 below zero? Stay in the house. So we would get out there and skate.
That was the Nova Scotians and the West Indian chaps and the Americans. Well, none of them liked Americans. And especially they would warn the girls, like if they went out with Americans, that they would isolate them.
There were black communities in Nova Scotia, on the prairies, and elsewhere in the country. But Montreal was fast becoming the Harlem of Canada.
I always used to like to see the Porters come in town because I used to work at the Rockheads in St. Michel as a photographer, and I met lots of them. And I've seen them when they're in town. Maybe they bring some more guys in town. They're very nice and social. And they got along with the people here.
So when I first went to Montreal, it was the most exciting time of my life. I was fascinated by the nightclubs. Nightclubs just about every corner.
Mr. Rockhead, he started from a sleeping car porter. And he started the club. It's called Rockhead Paradise. And he had Joe Louis there and all big love stars. He had Josephine Baker and a lot of the entertainers from the States he's had at his club. And there was always a lineup outside the door. And I used to take pictures between shows at St. Michel, and then run across the street to Rockheads, take pictures there between shows. Grab a cab, go to the studio, and give them to him. He'd develop them. I'd come back again and take some more pictures between the shows. And then by that time, I'd go back and pick up the other pictures and sell them to the people. Let's do Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights.
By 1880, the city of Montreal had established itself as a major railway center. Montreal had an estimated 300 citizens of color. By the end of the 1920s, its black population had multiplied to as many as 3,000 persons.
When I was about 10 or 11, Dad took me to see jazz at the Philharmonic at the Montreal Forum. And that was like, it was like the circus of jazz, 2 or 3 big bands and so many stars, that you just heard about, and they were all there on stage. That's where I first saw Oscar Peterson, was at Montreal Forum as a kid at Jazz at the Philharmonic.
The education of a son by his traveling father began very early. Oscar Peterson's father, also a sleeping car porter, encouraged his son to pursue his ambitions. Never let convention be your guide. Sometimes the end of a line is a homecoming. Since the early 1970s, the annual Truro Golf Tournament has become a major community event, drawing family members and friends from all over. Francis Collins is an ardent community supporter.
Well, we had 9 brothers worked on the railroad, and one retired in Vancouver. 2 used to work on the railroad in Winnipeg. There was 2 in Montreal that worked on the railroad. They retire. I'm the last of the generation working on the railroad.
The formal carriage of the porter gives way in a more spiritual setting. In the Zion United Baptist Church in Truro, Nova Scotia, Francis Collins' posture represents a cause, soldiers of the Lord ushering his flock.
On the steps by the church. Stand by the church, you and John and Ted, and face the church that way. It was pretty good. I mean, yeah. Well, at least you thought of that. Yeah, something to do. You know. Well, I don't know.
Truro, Nova Scotia has been the home of hundreds of former sleeping car porters, Francis Collins and John Clike among them. For several generations, the Clike family name has been part of the Nova Scotian community.
At one time, we had about 800 porters on our seniority list. Well, while most of the blacks was porters, there was no other job available to them. If you didn't work on the trains, you hardly work at all, so that's how they came, because it was the only job, because you only could be a porter then if you were black. No whites.
Calvin Ruck, a former porter, retired social worker, and a military historian. He is also the recipient of an honorary doctorate degree from Dalhousie University for his contribution to the community.
It was good from a financial viewpoint. It was blacks in Halifax who worked on the CNR, especially the long-time porters who ran regular. These are people with 35, 40-year service. So they had regular runs. They were considered the elite in the black community. They had a steady job. They didn't wear dirty working clothes. They went to work dressed up. So they had status in the community. Matter of fact, some people refer to them as the 400s in the black community. So from a financial aspect, it was good.
Next is... Oh, let's give him time to sweat a bit. My good friend and fellow deacon Lee Williams and his wife Alice.
When we moved to Saskatoon, or even in North Battleford, the train used to come through there. And there was a sleeping car on that train, and nothing else to do, go down to the station and see the train come in and see the porter step out with his box. And it just naturally occurred to you that that's one meaningful job that a black man is on, and I suppose that just stayed with us. And when everything else ran out, I applied for a job on the railroad in 1930. And I stayed there until 1972. From 1930 till 1972. There was nothing else.
The only job they could get was the railroad job.
That's right.
Or a shoe shine job. Those 2 jobs they could get. That's the only job.
So that's why they come to Winnipeg to work. They didn't drive no taxi because a black man couldn't get no job driving a taxi.
That's true.
Not in the 40s.
Okay, it's a still life. I can't paint flowers, so I'm gonna paint something that has meaning for me.
Clifton Ruggles is a teacher, journalist, and an artist from Montreal.
It was a job that he shared very little with us at home. And I always ask myself the reason why. Why does he not talk about his work? He talked about some of the people he met. He talked about some of the positive experiences, but he never really talked about the work per se. And when I became a certain age, I wanted to go work on the trains because he loved trains. Trains were his life. But he never encouraged me to seek that kind of employment. So that raised another question. My father passed away some years ago, and when he passed away, I took the opportunity to find a job working as a porter because I wanted to understand him. I wanted to understand what he'd lived through, what his life was like.
Well, I think the most significant thing that I learned from my dad was just a sense of what it was. Well, I would say it would be diplomacy, how to handle situations where you basically use your wits rather than your anger or your strength to resolve situations. A lot of times they had to put up with a lot of things which would be considered quite insulting. Passengers, I mean, for example, especially sometimes he tended bar, people drinking at a bar say things, they just let it fly, their brain disconnects as their mouth opens, and rather than react with anger, he would always find a subtle way. I mean, let's face it, they didn't want to lose their job, so they were sort of under constraint to make sure that they didn't insult the passengers, but some passengers really should have been insulted. They should have been ejected from the train.
You got every name in the book, especially if they were drinking. And one thing I didn't like about it, the disciplinary action you went through, because somebody would be drunk, they would put a letter in on you, and you would have to go through a review board, but you wasn't allowed a lawyer, and when what they say was God, and you were some of them were fired automatic for nothing, just because somebody wrote a letter and said you did this.
In Canada, it wasn't like the United States was just open, that you were third class, even with the government. In Canada, the government said you were equal, but when it came down to actual facts, it was different. Some of the working conditions was, for instance, they didn't talk to you like they talked to the white employees. You weren't supposed to have an opinion.
I had an incident one time where a major in the Canadian Army, he was feeling pretty good. He inebriated to some degree. While I was making a bed for another passenger, he came out into the body of the car. He had a private room. We call it drawing room, and he literally tried to physically force me to stop what I was doing and make his bed. I told him I'd be there in a minute, sir. We called him all sir or madam. And he said, no, you're going to make it right now. And he literally tried to push me into his drawing room. I refused to go. I reported the incident to the sleeping car conductor and asked him to speak to this person. And he would not. He refused to intercede. So you had no rights at all. In some cases, you were just like a non-person.
Endurance was the key. If a man could endure, be patient and courteous in a storm of abuse while he practiced God's codes of service, his reward was vision. It became a black man's job because of what black men could bring to it: endurance.
They didn't treat you like a human being. They throw the weight around. And I guess a lot of guys stayed there because they had families at home and no other job. But it was pretty crude, pretty rough.
In my talking with his friends and the people that he knew and the people that he worked with, I learned about spittoons, And porters had to clean spittoons, and porters had to shine shoes, and everyone who got on the train was your boss.
And actually, just like days of slavery, you went there, you made the beds, and You cleaned their shoes and took care of them, took care of the car during the day. So it wasn't a pleasant environment at the time.
Oh, one thing, when you went into the dining car, the waiters would holler out to the chef in the kitchen in a very loud voice, "What do you got for the porters?" It was just like we didn't eat the same kind of food as everybody else. I found it rather degrading.
You had a pillow and a blanket, and you were in the smoking room, and that's where you slept for your 3 hours rest period. They put a curtain around the porters when they went in the diner to eat. And they had a certain menu for the porters. Sometimes it wasn't fit to eat, really.
I'll never forget that curtain. It was really slap in the face. Green curtain, and you couldn't sit with the other passengers.
If a porter received a total of 60 demerit marks, this was grounds for dismissal. Ever watchful, all service was to be executed efficiently and efficaciously. Naturally, he was always looking over his shoulder.
That one part of the job I didn't like was the inspectors. They would get on in the middle of the night trying to catch you, and the job had a lot of little things about it that you wouldn't approve of, but I guess we got used to it. And
at the one time, they say all porters look alike. And if you walk through the train at the wrong time and somebody did something, you get blamed for it until you prove it that you didn't do it.
And one time, a fellow reported me. He reported me for not reporting another employee. I got the 35 demerit mark. I could have fought it, but I said, what's 35? But I saved another employee's job. You could be friendly with the men, but not the women passengers. The conductors are on you. Don't talk too long. They'll come to you. Come on now, just move it on. Don't get too over-friendly.
You couldn't stop and hold conversation with them or act in a familiar or friendly manner. You had to just be detached all the time. It wasn't an easy situation. Because some people get on the train and they didn't see your color. They would talk to you just like they're talking to anybody else. And you had to keep away from that. And some of the porters that maybe they didn't do anything wrong, but they were too familiar with the lady passenger. So you're dismissed.
money and women were two things that you didn't get no demerit marks over. You was automatically canned. Your first offense.
What I learned from the experience of working as a porter, following in my father's footsteps, was the tremendous struggle and fortitude and courage it took to be able to do this kind of work, to take the kind of treatment that they took. You know, sometimes the racism was so extreme that porters would shatter mirrors with their hands. I mean, they would look at themselves and they hated some of the things that they were forced to do in order to retain that employment so that they could feed their families.
Basically, we were afraid. We were very docile, very passive. And that was passed down to the younger porters from the older porters. They never complained about their situation in life, the lack of opportunities, the way they were treated. I got tired of the things that we were being subjected to. As a matter of fact, one time I applied for a job as a brakeman with the CNR. The superintendent was coming to the station in Halifax, and I was sitting down. And I don't know what came over me, but something made me get up. And I got up, and I approached him just like that, just almost at the spur of the moment. I said to him, I'd like to apply for a job as a brakeman. He was sort of taken back. He hesitated for a minute. Then he told me to go upstairs and see a secretary and get an application form. I did that. Went upstairs in the CNR station and got an application form, filled it out, and left it with the secretary. And that was the last I heard of it. They didn't get back to me, and I didn't follow it up. I just made a statement by asking for the application form. I knew very well that there were no blacks working as brakemen.
I joined the railroad as a porter. I got to learn very soon that there were no advancement for me. I would join the railroad, and if I lived 10, 20, 30 years after I retire, I'd still be retired as a porter. That didn't give me too much hope.
But I didn't have any problem with promotions because that was something that wasn't going to happen. And as a matter of fact, we had a superintendent out of Toronto which said that once the job paid more than $1, it was no longer a job for the black man.
How I survived, I don't know. God must have been in the plan, I guess, because I never did accept being used as third class. I thought it was first class.
There was something that had to be done. Whether or not I worked for CNR or went out and dug ditches, it didn't matter, the fact that I had a job to do. And this only promoted my feelings of being very aggressive, that we had to prove a point and say, okay, there's a lot of available areas of improvement for all of us in the industry. So why am I stuck in one job when I can do the other job? And the only thing is stopping me from doing the other job is the point of racism. So here is something that we had to break down.
I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. William Blake.
The way the porters were treated, it was a pretty sad situation, but I never paid much attention to it. I'd go on the job, do my job, and go home. I guess I handled my own affairs with the company pretty good, and some of the boys started to ask me to be a porter representative.
The honeymoon with the trains was over. The porters turned their attention to the improvement of working conditions and promotional opportunities.
And it wasn't easy. I think the first time I raised the question was in 1955, and I took a resolution to the Union Convention. Asked the Brotherhood to accept black as real brothers and see that the job discrimination was removed from our collective agreement.
They fought on all fronts: Montreal, Halifax, Vancouver, and Winnipeg.
At Canadian National, where I worked, where I was employed, there were two groups of people, and for all intents and purposes, we call them Group 1 and Group 2. Group 1 was referred to as the sleeping car conductors. dining car, stores, and waiters, and there were white employees. Group 2, as we know them, were porters, buffet porters, etc., and there were predominantly black employees.
Never be afraid of your boss,
That's right.
but respect him.
Right.
I happened to meet John Diefenbaker when I was working out of Saskatoon as a porter. That's where I started, as a porter. He was a member of Parliament out of Prince Albert at the time, and he used to ride the train from Saskatoon to Regina. And he was the type of fellow that when he got on the train, he was always taking his time talking to employees, porters, anybody. And that's how I got to know him. For years, I hadn't seen him for years after I left Saskatoon to come to Winnipeg. I hadn't seen him, but I just kind of kept track of what he was doing, and he got to be Prime Minister. And when this issue raised, I knew that I was going to have problems. I'd probably be framed out of a job. So I contacted him, wrote him a letter, and he wrote back and he said he would do anything in his power. But he sent me a copy of the Canada Fair Employment Practices Act, told me what to do about it.
The porters' final struggle for equality lasted for more than a decade. After more than 60 years of protected passage, the passing of knowledge and right from grandfather to son, the tracks had come together at no place.
Quite a little time went on, and we didn't hear anything one way or the other. And I wrote the Prime Minister, Lester B. Pearson, a letter. I just stated that we had laid a complaint on the Canada Fair Employment Practices Act to eliminate discrimination against blacks on the railway, and we expected the law to be enforced by his cabinet. And if that didn't take place, we would be forced to take whatever other action we found necessary. And a few days after that, the announcement came down that he had informed the company and the union that they'd either break up the discriminatory conditions of our employment or the government would do it for them, and that was it. So the union stepped in and changed it.
A man. You are my equal. You are another human being, and not someone who we can look down on, not someone who we oppress, not someone we consider to be a second-class citizen, but someone who has equal value.
$493 months. You know what that equals to? 41 years and 1 month.
I have 40 years.
He ended up with a high title, one jump ahead of me. If it wasn't for Lee, we wouldn't have been able to get in these higher positions. He wouldn't be able to be a service manager. I wouldn't have been able to be a conductor.
I think it made a lot of people realize that a lot of black people, Canadians, had the ability for any job. And it automatically opened up. Black people were able to get jobs that they'd never heard of before, they never thought they'd ever have. And it opened up right across the country. And that's why you see today that so many blacks are in jobs that back in my time you'd never see them. A lot of employers didn't think blacks could do the jobs. And the publicity campaign opened up a lot of eyes, and not only was then a fear of violating the Canada Fair Employment Practices Act, but they realized that blacks were capable of doing these jobs. So there's hundreds of thousands of blacks on jobs that they never would have had before. So it was not only helped the porters, it helped blacks all across the country.
There has been a major change, hasn't it, George, in terms of RSCMP?
Yeah, you take years ago, music come along or something like that would never happen.
Yeah. I think that you'll see more change as time goes on.
Oh, definitely.
I grew up in Sydney. In my wildest dreams, I didn't aspire to be a policeman because there were no black policemen. You couldn't drive a transit bus or a tram car, whatever was in use at that point in time. There were very few blacks working in the hotels. Maybe a few women worked in the loungy part of the hotels. So there were a lot of places that you were excluded. There were no blacks, probably up until the 50s, working in the stores as clerks, not even on a part-time basis.
I found it very difficult doing the kind of work that my father did, given my being another generation, and a generation that has seen a lot of changes, a generation that has experienced the 60s, the civil rights, a generation that was seeking out more. And I think that's one of the things that those parents wanted for their children. They wanted their children to have better opportunities. They wanted their children to have better education. They wanted their children to have better employment opportunities than they themselves had. They wanted their children's world to be different.
Oh, no, never. No. I don't know what I was considering at that time, but it certainly wasn't what I was considering. And of course, as far as my dad was concerned, there's no way he would consider me being a porter. As far as he was concerned, I was going to have an education. And if he had his way, I'd either be a doctor or a minister, because they always worked.
I remember one time going to see an art station for my pay, and there was a lady there behind the counter. She said to my oldest son, Doug, he was about 5 or 6 years old at the time, she said, "Are you going to be a porter like your dad?" He said, "No." He said, "I want to be a doctor," he said. But he changed his mind along the way and became a lawyer. No, we definitely did not encourage our sons to become Stephen Carr porters. We encouraged them to get an education. My second son, he got his doctorate degree in philosophy. He's a child psychologist. And our daughter, she studied at the College of Art and Design. She's now a fashion designer. So they all got a good education. And I think that's crucial. That's the key.
The job was an opportunity. It was a stable job. Yeah, people could provide for their families. So even in the negative, there's always positive. In art, for example, out of pain and struggle, there is beauty. The beauty of survival. And I think the story of the porters is the story of the pain, the struggle, and the beauty of survival.
Balance a rail, step a track. When will my father be coming back?